He says, I'm deadline driven. Things don't get done until the deadline is there. When you think about a deadline, should really be called alive lines, because they push us into action and bring us alive. And in my company, we always use the last minute panic deadline strategy. You know, you're working till the very last, you just coast along till the very last minute, then you fly into total panic mode, bust your buns, stay up all night, get it done, just in time to meet the deadline. And it always worked, except once. We were doing this huge product launch for a company, and when the CEO was standing up on stage like this, speaking to thousands of people, he got halfway through his presentation, and the screen went black, because I didn't finish his presentation. Well, you can imagine the feeling in the pit of my stomach when that happened. He didn't seem to mind. He said, I like your video so much, I'll let this one go. I said, I won't let it go. We missed the deadline, it's never going to happen again. So from that minute on, we adopted the panic early deadline strategy. So we always set a false deadline, but you have to treat it like a real deadline. Stay up all night, bust your buns, work hard, and then you coast to the real deadline, which is a great feeling. You know you're going to panic, just do it earlier. It takes the same amount of time either way. One thing we have to keep pushing out of is our comfort zone, because the irony is success brings comfort, and then comfort limits success. Percy Cerruti, a great running coach, once said, you only ever grow as a human being if you're outside your comfort zone. And Richard Branson must believe that. He's a billionaire. He could easily sit back in his comfort zone. He said to me, I don't like to get too comfortable. I like to push and see what I'm capable of. And I think people get more satisfaction if they live their lives in that way. In the book, I show some other ways you can push yourselves to success. Through challenges, goals, self-discipline, or a competitor hot on your heels. The fifth trait successful people have in common is ideas. Ted Turner once said, I intend to conquer the world, but instead of conquering with bombs, I intend to conquer with good ideas. And I'd say his idea for CNN 24-hour news was a really good one. When I was growing up, you could only watch the news at 6 p.m. or 10 p.m. Ted Turner changed all that. Now, ideas are about creativity, but I don't like the word creative, because there's a myth that only artsy people are creative. The reality is everybody is creative. That's what the mind is designed to do, come up with ideas. And I've worked with many business people over the years who are actually far more creative than the artists I know. It's just that their canvas is a spreadsheet or a business plan. As Donald Trump says, deals are my art form. Surgeon Douglas Dorner says the best surgeons are creative. Every surgical procedure has some slightly different twist, and the best surgeons come up with ideas to deal with those twists. So how do we get ideas? Well, one way is to have a problem, because many great ideas throughout history have sprung from everyday problems. Richard Branson had a problem. He was stranded after his flight to Puerto Rico was canceled. So he got on the phone, called around, chartered a plane, sold tickets to the other stranded passengers, and actually ended up making a profit. The light went on in his head, and he said, gee, I could start an airline. And he started Virgin Atlantic. Now, I'd only read that story in a magazine. So last year, when I gave a talk with Richard in Norway, to the biggest bank in Norway, I said to him, is that true how you came up with the idea for Virgin Atlantic? And he laughed and said, yeah, it is true. And he told me how he ran around the airport trying to find a blackboard, and then he scribbled on it, cheap flight to Puerto Rico. And then afterwards, a man came up and said, you know, that wasn't a bad flight. Fix up the service a little, and you could be in business. And that's when the idea popped into his head, when the man said that. So Richard listened, and that's another way to come up with ideas. Keep our ears open and listen. One night after a concert, Paul McCartney listened to Ringo. Ringo said, gee, I'm knackered. It's been a hard day's night. Paul said, what did you say? Ringo said, you know, it's been a hard day's night. I don't know if Ringo was dyslexic, but he was always getting his words mixed up. Well, the light went on in Paul's head, and he went away and wrote one of the Beatles' biggest hits. Did you know the average doctor only listens to patients for 14 seconds before interrupting? I know what you women are thinking. That's twice as long as most men. But Jean Carruthers is one doctor who did listen to a patient, and it changed her life. She was using Botox to treat the patient for muscle spasms, and she was injecting the patient's eyelids to stop them from fluttering, from spasming. And the patient said, "Why didn't you inject my forehead, my brow?" And Gene said, "Well, you don't need it there. You're not spasming on your forehead." And the patient said, "Oh, I know, except every time you inject my forehead, people tell me I look younger and I get a beautiful, untroubled expression." Bing, at that moment, Gene got the idea to use Botox to reduce wrinkles. Started a billion-dollar industry from that one comment. No wonder she says, you've got to listen to your patients, number one. Another way to get ideas is to keep our eyes open and look around. Richard Feynman was a physicist eating lunch in the Cornell University cafeteria. And a student stood up and threw a plate across the room. I guess this was the days before Frisbees. And Feynman noticed that as the plate spun through the air, the Cornell insignia seemed to be spinning at a different rate of speed than the rest of the plate. Like when you see a car go by and the hubcap seems to be spinning different from the wheel. Anyway, he said he got an idea and worked out the motion of the mass particles, whatever they are. He says, I got the Nobel Prize from looking at that plate. I look at a plate and all I see is food. This guy looks at a plate and wins the Nobel Prize. That's what I call observation. And that's why IQ is often more important than IQ. As Marilyn Vos Savant says, she has the highest IQ ever recorded. To acquire knowledge, one must study, but to acquire wisdom, one must observe. And now the biggest secret to coming up with great ideas. A drum roll, please. No drum rolls here. Students usually bang on their knees. Anyway, the biggest way to come up with good ideas is to write them down. Because if you don't write them down, they're going to disappear, never to return. Izzy Sharp, founder of Four Seasons Hotels, said to me, if an idea comes up, I will always stop and make a note, no matter where I am, even at dinner. He's been to dinner with the President of the United States. He'll still pull out his pad and paper and take notes. And Bob Dylan didn't pull his great ideas for songs out of the air. He pulled them out of a box. One day somebody complimented Bob on a song he'd written. He said, oh, I didn't write that. The box did. The person said, what do you mean? He explained that if he was walking down the street or in a restaurant and somebody said something interesting, he'd pull out his pad and paper and write it down. And when he got home, he'd put the idea in a box. And when it came time to write a new song, he just went to the box. And if Larry Page didn't write down his ideas, there might be no Google today. He says, when I was 23, I suddenly woke up thinking, what if we could download the whole web and just keep the links? I grabbed a pen and started scribbling out the details, and Google was born. When a really great dream shows up, grab it. And I would say you can't grab it if you don't have pen and paper handy. I always carry two pens because I'm paranoid that one will run out of ink. And now I also carry a digital recorder. My point is there's no magic to so-called creativity and innovation. It's just doing lots of little things that lead to big ideas. The sixth trait successful people have in common is improve. It's like they're on a continuous mission to improve themselves and what they do. Robert H. Denard, who invented dynamic random access memory that made all computers possible, says innovation comes from believing that everything has the potential to be improved. And Paul McCartney is the #1 songwriter in British chart history. But he says, I'm still looking to write a great song. You never think, well, that's good enough.